So this is the first time that I rode with the new suspension off-road on the 950 Adventure. This winter I sent it out to Konflict Motorsports. Previously it had the 210mm suspension on it that the non-S version of the 950 would have had.
So far so good. Much less bouncy, but it actually feels softer than it did before. It may end up being a good thing.
The rear was all stock at 77,000 miles. I don't think the shock had ever been rebuilt.
Of course, I can't touch the ground now.
The front suspension had actually been redone by another company, but at the stock height, just with stiffer springs and different valving.
That feels slippery.
So I was used to the front being revalved already, not used to the rear, and of course not used to the extra 2.5 or so inches of ride height. Of course, it was also muddy out. I've got a TKC 80 front tire and a Moto's Tractionator Desert in the rear. Both of them had like 30-ish PSI in them, and it's muddy. So at the beginning, I'm still trying to find the limits of the bike. It changed so much with the new suspension. Still hard to get traction, but there is so much more drive out of that rear tire than there was before. I didn't really realize it, but previously the rear suspension felt like it was kind of bound up, and I don't know if the shock was worn out or if that's just how they are. But I had gotten used to that, and with the new valving and the slightly softer spring in the rear, it really hooks up and goes. But I'm really tall, so I can take advantage of the height and not worry too much about not being able to reach. So in addition to the rear kind of skipping along and feeling like it was just too stiff to handle any kind of terrain, the front previously, even though it was revalved and was stiffer, it would pogo. And it was actually really harsh for short, sharp hits, and then it would blow through the mid-stroke, and I'd still bottom out.
Wow, that suspension is amazing.
I did end up finding the bottom of the front suspension a couple times, but I had no preload on it, and then left the clickers right where they were when I got them from Alex.
It's so soft. Before, the rear was just like solid. Now it's actually got compliance, which is obviously good. Wow, it actually hooks up.
Like I'm saying here, it'll hook up and it'll actually keep the front wheel in the air, which it would never do before. The back wheel would hit and skip and spin. And it's muddy out and it's still hooking up pretty well.
As long as you got momentum, it'll do it. But it will not ride the high spot. Wow.
Of course, even suspension won't make up for tires when it's muddy like this. They still pack up. Going down hills was much more controlled. The wheels would stay in contact with the ground much better, whereas before, the front especially would pogo.
Front wheel stays in contact with the ground so much better than with the old suspension. Before, the front would be hopping up and the wheel would lose grip and I'd wash out the front. Okay, how do I get down there? Because this looks slippery, and it is. Wow, that's slick. Holy cow. Both wheels are locked up. Well, when I first came out here, I thought I was going to want more stiffness, but at least least in the mud, that is definitely not the case. I like it absorbing all these bumps and little hits so that I can just focus on using the clutch and the brake.
So I have really not had a chance to ride this in the dry off-road yet, only when it's wet like this. You can see I got really sloppy here. I sat down. As soon as you sit down, you get bucked all over the place.
Okay, the rear suspension is way better than it was.
When I first came out here, I thought for sure I was going to be blowing through the travel. The way it felt riding on pavement is kind of like a trophy truck. It floats a little bit and feels like it has a ton of travel, which it does. And it feels like if you hit a bump or something, it'll blow right through it. But when you actually get out there, it soaks bumps up really well, but it doesn't bottom out unless you're really pushing. And I'm still trying to find the limits. My guess is I'll bottom it out quite a bit more when it's dry out, going faster.
That's fun. I couldn't do that before.
I came up over that rise, and instead of just spinning, the back wheel actually caught traction and kept the front up in the air. It never would have done that before. This right here is those ripples I was talking about where it would
still
pogo.
hops a little bit. Still had the front wheel off the ground there through those. But all things considered, better than it was by a lot.
So that's the pogoing I was talking about, where the front wheel would skip a little bit. And before, with the old revalve setup, it would blow through its travel, bottom out, and then the wheel would come off the ground on the back side of the ripple, and then it would top out, and it was uncontrollable, and it would kick sideways really bad. I don't have a steering damper on the bike. So now, yeah, it still skips the front tire a little bit, but it doesn't buck sideways, and it really doesn't feel violent anymore.
Oh, it's so much fun.
And interestingly, even though the bike has a lot more bottoming resistance than it used to, it's actually softer on the road. And I don't know if it's...
Except I don't trust that my feet aren't going to get caught.
So I do have a Senna headset on, talking to my buddies
There we
here.
go.
But even off-road, even though it's got much more bottoming resistance, it feels softer than it used to. It feels really connected. I think the front I'll go a little bit stiffer on. I did talk to Konflict again, and they recommended going up a little bit on the clickers and preload. Alex has been great for helping out with tips on what to change. So it's still winter here in Indiana, but I'm really looking forward to getting this thing out more when we get some dry weather and see what it can do, find the limits again. The new suspension really just, it makes the bike. It's unbelievable what it can do.